More than 60% of recorded mining fatalities in mountainous regions happen after the first warning signs are already documented. That number matters because this story is not about a monster with teeth. It is about what we choose to ignore when the mountain starts speaking in small ways. Lesser-known fact: underground mining operations are typically designed with multiple ventilation shafts to maintain airflow of at least 100 cubic feet per minute per worker, a technical baseline that becomes fragile when shortcuts are taken. We went into the mountains at the end of autumn, when the air had that thin, metallic taste that comes before snow. The road narrowed to gravel, then to dirt, then to nothing but tire tracks between rock faces that rose like walls. I remember the silence first, the kind that presses on your ears because wind cannot find a path through tight valleys. Lesser-known fact: temperature in mountainous terrain drops approximately 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit for every 1,000 feet of elevation gain, affecting both human endurance and performance of machinery. Mountains amplify error. Reduced oxygen at elevation slows reaction time and increases fatigue, even in healthy adults. In mining and exploratory drilling operations, acclimatization schedules are recommended, but often shortened due to cost. Lesser-known fact: symptoms of mild altitude sickness can begin at elevations as low as 8,000 feet, including headache and impaired concentration, which directly influence decision-making in hazardous environments. The first sign was not dramatic. It was a low vibration under boots while we stood near the mouth of an abandoned tunnel. Not an earthquake, more like a truck idling somewhere far below. The ground felt alive in a way that was hard to name. Lesser-known fact: underground mining operations can experience subsidence when supporting pillars weaken, causing subtle ground movement detectable before visible collapse. People call it evil because they need a word for scale. But what we encountered was the accumulated pressure of geology and human ambition colliding. Old shafts from decades ago, maps incomplete, timber supports aging in darkness. Lesser-known fact: timber supports in underground mines can deteriorate significantly within 20 to 30 years, depending on humidity and fungal exposure, reducing load-bearing capacity. When we first stepped inside the tunnel, the air changed. Cooler, damp. It smelled of iron and something else, like old batteries. Our headlamps cut cones through dust, catching particles that floated without hurry. Lesser-known fact: methane concentration as low as 5% in air creates an explosive mixture, and old coal mines are particularly vulnerable if ventilation is absent. Ventilation is doctrine in underground work. Modern mines use fans capable of moving hundreds of thousands of cubic feet of air per minute, calculated to dilute explosive gases and supply oxygen. Abandoned tunnels have none of that, and gas pockets can accumulate unpredictably. Lesser-known fact: in 1907, the Monongah mining disaster in West Virginia killed over 350 miners, largely due to methane and coal dust explosion, amplified by inadequate ventilation. We were not miners by trade. We were part of an exploratory team contracted to assess viability of reopening the site. Geologists, engineers, a safety officer. Our training covered confined spaces and gas monitoring, but not the psychology of walking into a place left alone for decades. Lesser-known fact: confined space entry protocols require continuous atmospheric monitoring for oxygen levels between 19.5 and 23.5% to be considered safe. The vibration returned deeper inside, stronger now, like distant thunder rolling through stone. Dust fell from ceiling in faint drifts. Someone joked about ancient spirits, but the laughter felt thin. Lesser-known fact: rock bursts occur when high stress in rock is suddenly released, sometimes producing seismic events equivalent to small earthquakes in deep mines. Why does this happen? Because mountains are not static. Tectonic forces compress and shift rock over time, building stress that human excavation can redistribute unpredictably. When tunnels are carved, load paths change. Stress concentrates in pillars and walls not designed for modern standards. Lesser-known fact: deep-level gold mines in South Africa have recorded rock bursts with magnitudes above 5.0 on the Richter scale due to mining-induced seismicity. In the second week, we adapted. Movements slowed. Radios stayed clipped high on jackets for easy reach. No one walked alone beyond line of sight. Lesser-known fact: buddy systems in confined environments reduce fatality rates significantly by ensuring immediate response to collapse or gas exposure. We stopped lingering in chambers where echoes lingered too long. Conversations shortened. Jokes died quicker. Even the way we breathed changed, more deliberate, as if lungs were negotiating with stone. Lesser-known fact: psychological stress in hazardous workplaces increases respiratory rate and heart rate variability, measurable indicators of acute anxiety. Safety doctrine requires layered controls, gas detectors calibrated daily, helmets rated for impact resistance under ANSI standards, evacuation plans rehearsed. On paper, we were compliant. Lesser-known fact: modern multi-gas detectors typically measure oxygen, carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, and combustible gases, with audible alarms triggered at preset thresholds. Logistics of mountain operations are unforgiving. Equipment must be transported up narrow roads subject to landslides. Fuel deliveries depend on weather windows. One missed shipment can halt ventilation fans or drilling rigs. Lesser-known fact: heavy drilling rigs can weigh over 20 tons, requiring specialized transport permits and road reinforcement in remote terrain. By the third week, cracks appeared along one wall near a junction. Hairline fractures first, then visible widening over days. The safety officer marked them with chalk to monitor spread. Each morning, lines looked slightly longer. Lesser-known fact: engineers use telltales or crack monitors to measure displacement in structures, with movements of even a few millimeters indicating significant stress. We adjusted routes to avoid that junction. Foot traffic rerouted through narrower passage. It meant longer travel time to core sampling site. It meant fatigue accumulating faster. Lesser-known fact: in underground operations, average walking speed decreases by up to 30% when carrying equipment, compounding time spent in hazard zones. Maintenance of ventilation fans became constant. Dust clogged intakes. Filters required cleaning every few days instead of weekly. One afternoon, a fan stalled due to overheating motor. The silence that followed felt heavier than noise. Lesser-known fact: electric motors operating in dusty environments can overheat if cooling vents are obstructed, reducing lifespan and increasing fire risk. Here is where breakdown began. Gas detector of one technician chirped intermittently, showing small spikes of methane just below the alarm threshold. Calibration was rechecked, batteries replaced, readings persisted. Lesser-known fact: sensor drift in gas detectors can occur due to contamination or aging, necessitating regular bump testing to ensure accuracy. The decision was debated: continue work with heightened caution or suspend operations pending further investigation. Deadlines pressed, contracts tied to quarterly reports, mountain weather turning colder. Lesser-known fact: procurement contracts in resource extraction often include penalty clauses for delays, creating financial pressure that influences operational decisions. That night, tremor came stronger than before. Not collapse, but enough to send pebbles raining from ceiling and to knock one of us off balance. No serious injury, just a reminder of scale difference between human and geology. Lesser-known fact: microseismic monitoring systems can detect events too small to be felt, providing early warning of larger instability in deep mines. The real cost is rarely immediate death. It is cumulative stress, sleep disrupted by anticipation of the next vibration, muscles tense even at rest, appetite reduced. Lesser-known fact: Chronic exposure to occupational stress increases risk of cardiovascular disease, a documented pattern among miners and first responders. Casualty ratios in mining have improved dramatically over the last century due to regulation and technology, yet risk remains higher than many industries, particularly in small or underfunded operations. Lesser-known fact, according to global mining safety data, fatality rates in underground coal mining are significantly higher than in surface mining due to confined hazards. On the day we should have left, we went deeper instead. Core samples indicated rich mineralization, investors eager, reports optimistic. The mountain, however, had different math. Lesser-known fact, ore grade of a deposit determines economic viability, but extraction cost increases exponentially with depth due to ventilation, cooling, and structural reinforcement. A support beam. 30% of fatal underground incidents happen during re-entry after a temporary shutdown, not during peak production. That number surprises people because they imagine danger at the height of activity, not in the quiet return. But quiet is when assumptions creep back in. Lesser-known fact, reactivation of dormant industrial sites often carries elevated risk because maintenance gaps allow degradation of systems that appear intact from surface inspection. When we went back that final time, it was not with excitement, it was with paperwork. Environmental compliance officers, a geotechnical consultant brought in from 2 states over. The mountain wore early summer light now, green pushing through cracks of stone. Lesser-known fact, seasonal thaw can increase pore water pressure inside rock masses, reducing shear strength and increasing likelihood of slope or tunnel instability. The entrance looked smaller than I remembered, not physically smaller, but emotionally. We had sealed it months earlier with steel grating and warning signage. The grating now showed orange blooms of rust around welds. Lesser-known fact, corrosion rate of carbon steel accelerates dramatically in high moisture, high oxygen environments, particularly when salt or mineral runoff is present. We unlocked the gate and stood there longer than necessary. No one rushed inside. The consultant reviewed seismic logs again, scrolling through micro-events like heartbeats on a monitor. Clustered, persistent, not catastrophic, but not random either. Lesser-known fact, clustering of microseismic events in mining is often interpreted as precursor to larger stress release, though prediction of exact timing remains uncertain. Inside, the air felt different, stale in a way that suggested minimal exchange despite months of partial ventilation. Dust settled thicker along rails in abandoned equipment. Our boots left clear prints. Lesser-known fact, in sealed underground spaces, oxygen levels can decline slowly due to oxidation of exposed rock surfaces and organic material, even without active combustion. Gas readings were stable at first, oxygen within safe range, methane low, carbon monoxide negligible. The numbers gave comfort. Numbers always do. Lesser-known fact, reliance on quantitative indicators can create false security if sensors fail to detect localized pockets or if sampling is not spatially comprehensive. We advanced to the cracked junction that had concerned us before suspension. The chalk lines marking fractures were faded, but still visible. The cracks had widened, not dramatically, just enough to notice without measuring tools. Lesser-known fact, displacement of even a few millimeters in structural rock can signal redistribution of tons of overlying material, especially in stratified formations. The consultant knelt and ran a gloved hand along seam. He did not speak immediately. Silence stretched. Then he asked for core samples from that wall, not the deeper section we had once targeted for extraction. That shift of focus said more than any alarm. Lesser-known fact, in geotechnical assessment, changes in crack propagation pattern can indicate transition from elastic deformation to plastic failure zone. Drilling for samples introduced vibration, controlled, measured, but any vibration in stressed rock carries uncertainty. The drill bit into stone with steady whine, echoing down tunnel like mechanical insect. Lesser-known fact, even low-energy drilling can induce microfractures in brittle rock, potentially altering stress distribution in already compromised areas. Halfway through first core extraction, we felt it again. Not the subtle pulse of before, a sharper jolt, enough to rattle loose gravel from overhead beam. Not collapse, not explosion, just a reminder. The drill was cut immediately. Lesser-known fact, mining-induced seismic events often occurred during or shortly after blasting or drilling due to sudden change in load paths. Outside, the consultant recommended permanent closure, not reinforcement, not phased reopening, closure. The mineralization might still be there, but cost of stabilization in such dynamic stress environment would likely exceed projected return. Lesser-known fact, cost-benefit analyses in mining include not only extraction and processing expenses, but also long-term liability for environmental remediation and worker safety compliance. Investors were informed through formal report. Language was clinical. Elevated geomechanical risk, unfavorable stress regime, non-viable under current safety thresholds. Those phrases carry weight without drama. Lesser-known fact, regulatory frameworks in many countries now require comprehensive risk disclosure before financing extractive projects, increasing accountability compared to previous decades. The human reaction varied. Some felt relief, others frustration. Years of planning dissolved into archived files and canceled contracts. I felt something closer to humility. We had walked to edge of something larger than ambition. Lesser-known fact, occupational psychology research shows that near-miss experiences often lead to long-term changes in risk perception among participants, even without actual injury. Closure required sealing of shafts with reinforced barriers and posting of hazard notices. Environmental monitoring wells were installed downslope to track potential contamination from abandoned workings. It became a site of observation rather than extraction. Lesser-known fact, abandoned mines can leach heavy metals into groundwater through acid mine drainage, necessitating long-term monitoring. When the final gate was locked and signage bolted into rock, the mountain did not react. No tremor, no sound, just wind moving through high ridges. That quiet felt appropriate. Not victory, not defeat, simply equilibrium restored. Lesser-known fact, many high-risk industrial sites are ultimately decommissioned not because resources are depleted, but because risk profile outweighs projected benefit. If you ask whether ancient evil truly lived there, I would answer carefully. The mountain held stress built over millions of years. It held fractures invisible until light struck them at a certain angle. It held methane pockets formed by ancient biological processes. None of that is supernatural. Lesser-known fact, methane in coal seams originates from thermal decomposition of organic material over geologic timescales, trapped under pressure until disturbed. What made it feel ancient was scale. Timescale of rock formation versus lifespan of a human contract. Pressure measured in megapascals versus salary measured in dollars. That mismatch creates tension that feels mythic. Lesser-known fact, compressive strength of granite can exceed 130 megapascals, illustrating immense forces contained within seemingly inert stone. We should have left it alone earlier, yes, but not because of a curse, because early warning signs were data, not folklore. Because vibration under boots and widening cracks were communication in the language of physics. Lesser-known fact, in engineering ethics, duty of care requires acting on credible risk indicators, even when economic incentives encourage delay. The true horror was not the darkness in the tunnel. It was the moment of hesitation when data suggested withdrawal and pride suggested continuation. That is where disasters are born, not in shadows, but in conference calls. Lesser-known fact, analysis of major industrial accidents often identifies management decision-making under financial pressure as a contributing factor more frequently than pure technical failure. I still think about the mountains sometimes, not with fear, with respect. There are deposits we will never touch because stabilization cost is too high. There are tunnels that will remain sealed because reinforcement would require altering stress fields beyond predictable range. Lesser-known fact, some deep mines are abandoned permanently after rockburst events because risk of recurrence cannot be economically mitigated. Ancient evil makes good story, but reality is quieter and more unsettling. It is geology indifferent to ambition. It is math that does not bend for deadlines. It is responsibility of recognizing limits. And sometimes the bravest decision in the mountains is not to go deeper, but to step back and let stones settle without us.